37 years of building an empire, only to watch it crumble in the hands of his own blood. Marcus Whitfield had given everything to secure his family's future, transforming a small accounting firm into a financial powerhouse worth millions. But when his son's manipulative wife decided that the man who built it all was no longer welcome in his own legacy, she made a fatal miscalculation. What she didn't realize was that Marcus hadn't just built a business. He had built a network, earned respect, and mastered the art of strategic patience. Sometimes, the most devastating victories come not from anger, but from the quiet determination of a man who knows exactly what he's worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Whitfield had always believed that family was everything. At 64, with silver hair that caught the morning light streaming through his corner office window, he could still remember the exact moment that belief had shaped his entire life. It was 1987, and he was 27 years old, holding his newborn son David in the sterile hospital room while his wife Sarah slept peacefully nearby. The weight of that tiny life in his arms had been overwhelming, not because of fear, but because of the sudden, crushing responsibility he felt to build something lasting. That responsibility had driven every decision Marcus made for the next 3 decades. Fresh out of his CPA program and working for a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Portland, he had watched senior partners make decisions that prioritized short-term profits over client relationships. Night after night, he would come home to Sarah and baby David, his mind racing with ideas about how things could be done better, more ethically, with genuine care for the people who trusted them with their financial futures. The turning point came when Marcus witnessed his supervisor, Gerald Hoffman, deliberately inflate billable hours for a struggling family restaurant. The owners, an elderly Italian couple who had immigrated to America with nothing but recipes and hope, were being charged for services they hadn't received. When Marcus quietly approached Gerald about the discrepancy, he was told to mind his own business and remember who signed his paychecks. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Sarah, David sleeping in a carrier beside them, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to start his own practice, one built on integrity, personal relationships, and genuine expertise. Sarah, ever supportive despite their modest savings, simply nodded and asked what she could do to help. Whitfield Financial Services opened its doors 6 months later in a cramped 2-room office above a coffee shop on Burnside Street. Marcus had exactly 4 clients, all of them small business owners who had grown frustrated with the impersonal service they received from larger firms. His philosophy was simple: treat every client's money as if it were his own, provide honest advice even when it wasn't profitable, and never promise what couldn't be delivered. The early years were brutal. Marcus worked 16-hour days, often bringing David to the office on weekends while Sarah covered her nursing shifts at the hospital. He would set up a playpen in the corner of his office, David babbling happily while Marcus reviewed tax returns and prepared financial statements. Those were some of his most treasured memories, the sound of his son's laughter mixing with the rhythm of calculator keys and the scratch of pen on paper. Success came slowly, then all at once. Marcus's reputation for honesty and expertise spread through Portland's business community like ripples in a pond. The Italian restaurant owners Lorenzo and Maria Benedetti became his most vocal advocates after Marcus helped them restructure their debt and avoid bankruptcy. They sent him their friends, their neighbors, their extended family. Within 3 years, Whitfield Financial Services had outgrown the cramped office above the coffee shop. By the time David started kindergarten, Marcus had moved the business to a proper office building and hired his first employee, a sharp young accountant named Jennifer Chen, who shared his commitment to client service. Jennifer had been working for one of the large corporate firms downtown when she heard about Marcus's reputation through mutual contacts. She appeared at his office one Thursday afternoon with her resume and a simple proposition. She wanted to work for someone who still believed accounting was about helping people, not just maximizing profits. The partnership with Jennifer proved to be transformative. While Marcus excelled at building relationships and providing strategic guidance, Jennifer had a gift for the technical complexities of tax law and financial planning. Together, they began taking on larger clients, regional businesses that needed sophisticated financial services but wanted the personal attention that only a smaller firm could provide. As David grew older, Marcus made sure to include him in the business whenever possible. Summer breaks meant David would spend his days at the office, initially just playing in the conference room, but gradually taking on small tasks as he got older. Marcus taught him how to organize files, how to operate the copy machine, and most importantly, how to treat every person who walked through their doors with respect and attention. Marcus would often tell David stories about their clients while they drove to Little League games or family dinners. He spoke about Mrs. Patterson, the widow who had trusted them to manage her late husband's insurance settlement, and how careful planning had allowed her to keep her house and still have money for her grandchildren's college funds. He talked about the Rodriguez family, who had started a small landscaping business with nothing but a used truck and determination, and how proper bookkeeping and tax planning had helped them expand into a company with 30 employees. These weren't just business stories to Marcus. They were examples of how financial expertise, applied with care and integrity, could genuinely improve people's lives. He wanted David to understand that their family's prosperity came from serving others, from solving problems and providing security during uncertain times. By David's sophomore year in high school, Whitfield Financial Services employed 12 people and occupied an entire floor of a modern office building in downtown Portland. Marcus had developed specializations in small business consulting, estate planning, and investment management. The client base had grown to include some of the region's most successful entrepreneurs, all of whom had been attracted by the same qualities that had made the Italian restaurant owners Marcus's first advocates: honesty, expertise, and genuine personal attention. The financial success allowed Marcus to provide David with opportunities he himself had never had. Private school, summer camps, travel experiences that broadened his perspective on the world. But Marcus was careful to ensure that privilege didn't become entitlement. David was expected to work for his spending money, first through chores and later through part-time jobs at local businesses. Marcus wanted his son to understand the value of work, the satisfaction that came from earning something through effort rather than simply receiving it. During David's senior year of high school, Marcus began having more serious conversations with him about the future. David was bright, capable, and showed genuine interest in business, but Marcus wanted to make sure any involvement in the family company was based on merit rather than birthright. He encouraged David to attend college, to gain experience outside the family business, and to develop his own skills and perspective before making any long-term commitments. David chose to attend the University of Oregon, majoring in business administration with a focus on finance. Marcus was proud of his son's academic performance, but he was even more proud of David's character.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
David worked part-time throughout college, maintained good grades, and demonstrated the same work ethic that had driven Marcus's own success. During summer breaks, David would work at Whitfield Financial Services, but in entry-level positions where he learned the business from the ground up. The plan, though never formally articulated, was always that David would join the firm after graduation. Marcus had built something substantial, something that could provide security for generations of the Whitfield family. But he wanted to ensure that David was truly prepared for the responsibility, that he understood not just the technical aspects of the business, but the ethical foundation that had made it successful. Jennifer Chen, who had become Marcus's business partner and closest confidant over the years, often remarked on how similar David was to his father. Both had the same careful attention to detail, the same ability to build trust with clients, and the same genuine desire to help people solve their problems. She believed David would be an excellent addition to the firm, bringing fresh ideas and energy while maintaining the values that had made Whitfield Financial Services successful. As David's graduation approached, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what he had accomplished. Starting with nothing but determination and a commitment to doing things the right way, he had built a thriving business that employed 15 people and served hundreds of clients. More importantly, he had created something that could continue beyond his own lifetime, a legacy that would provide security and purpose for his son and future generations of the family. The business was valued at just over $8 million, with annual revenues approaching $3 million. Marcus owned the building that housed their offices, had established relationships with banks and investment firms throughout the Pacific Northwest, and had built a reputation that opened doors throughout the business community. He had achieved financial security that his own father, a factory worker who had struggled through multiple layoffs, could never have imagined. But beyond the financial success, Marcus was most proud of the culture he had created at Whitfield Financial Services. Employees stayed for years, often decades, because they felt valued and respected. Clients regularly referred their friends and family members because they trusted the advice they received. The firm had weathered economic downturns, changes in tax law, and shifts in the industry because it was built on relationships rather than just transactions. During David's final semester at the University of Oregon, he began spending more time at the office, working closely with Jennifer and the other senior staff members to understand the more complex aspects of the business. Marcus watched with pride as his son demonstrated natural ability in client relations, showing the same intuition for building trust that had been crucial to Marcus's own success. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. David would graduate in June, spend the summer learning the advanced aspects of the business, and officially join Whitfield Financial Services as a junior partner in the fall. Marcus had already begun discussing succession planning with his attorney and accountant, ensuring that the transition would be smooth and that David would have the legal and financial foundation necessary to eventually take full control of the company. The future looked bright, promising, and secure. Marcus had accomplished everything he had set out to do when he held his newborn son in that hospital room 37 years earlier. He had built something lasting, something meaningful, something that would provide for his family for generations to come. What Marcus didn't anticipate was that David's final semester would bring more than just academic achievements and business preparation. It would also bring Vanessa Morrison, a psychology major with striking features, ambitious goals, and a talent for reading people that rivaled any professional Marcus had ever encountered. David met her at a fraternity party in February, and by March, they were inseparable. Vanessa was everything David had never encountered before. Where David was methodical and careful, she was spontaneous and bold. Where he saw complexities and nuances, she saw opportunities and shortcuts. She had grown up in Los Angeles, the daughter of a real estate agent who had taught her to recognize value and negotiate aggressively. She was beautiful, intelligent, and possessed a magnetic personality that drew people to her immediately. When David brought Vanessa home for Easter weekend, Marcus felt an immediate unease that he couldn't quite articulate. She was charming, asking thoughtful questions about the business and expressing genuine interest in David's future plans. But there was something in her eyes, a calculating quality that reminded Marcus of some of the less ethical competitors he had encountered over the years. She seemed to be cataloging information rather than simply getting to know the family. Sarah, however, was charmed immediately. Vanessa complimented her cooking, asked about her nursing career, and showed apparent fascination with family photos and stories. She seemed genuinely interested in David's childhood, his accomplishments, and his relationship with his parents. Sarah later told Marcus that she thought Vanessa was perfect for David, exactly the kind of confident, ambitious woman who could support him in running a successful business. Marcus kept his concerns to himself, attributing them to the natural protectiveness of a father watching his son fall in love for the first time. David was clearly smitten, more animated and energetic than Marcus had seen him in years. If Vanessa made his son happy, Marcus reasoned, then he would make an effort to appreciate her qualities and welcome her into the family. Over the following months, as David's graduation approached, Vanessa became an increasingly frequent presence in their lives. She spent weekends at the family home, joined them for dinners, and even accompanied David to several client events and business functions. She was consistently charming and appropriate, making conversation with clients and demonstrating what appeared to be genuine interest in the business. But Marcus continued to notice small things that troubled him. The way Vanessa's attention seemed most focused when discussions turned to financial matters. The subtle questions she asked about client relationships, business valuations, and succession planning. The way she seemed to be studying the dynamics of the office, learning who held influence and how decisions were made. When David announced in May that he and Vanessa were engaged, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. He wanted to be happy for his son, and part of him genuinely was. David had found someone who clearly made him feel confident and excited about the future. But the engagement had happened quickly, perhaps too quickly, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's interest in David was connected to what David represented: security, prosperity, and social status. The wedding was planned for the following spring, giving them time to settle into their life together after David's graduation and entry into the business. Vanessa threw herself into wedding planning with the same intensity she seemed to bring to everything else, researching vendors, comparing prices, and negotiating contracts with a skill that impressed even Marcus. She had expensive tastes, but also a talent for finding ways to achieve her vision within reasonable budgets. As summer progressed and David began working full-time at Whitfield Financial Services, Marcus watched the young couple navigate their new life together. David was thriving in his role, bringing fresh energy and perspective to client relationships while learning the more complex aspects of financial planning and business management. Vanessa had found a position with a local marketing firm, work that seemed to suit her personality and allow her to use her persuasive abilities professionally. On the surface, everything appeared to be progressing smoothly. David was demonstrating the competence and integrity that Marcus had hoped to see, and Vanessa seemed to be building her own career while supporting David's entry into the family business. Marcus began to think that perhaps his initial concerns had been unfounded, that Vanessa's calculating nature was simply intelligence and ambition rather than anything more troubling. But as autumn arrived and the wedding date grew closer, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in the dynamics around the office. Vanessa had started visiting more frequently, often bringing lunch for David but staying to chat with other employees and ask casual questions about various aspects of the business. She seemed particularly interested in understanding how decisions were made, who had influence over different aspects of the company, and how the financial structure was organized. Marcus mentioned his observations to Jennifer during one of their regular partner meetings, expressing his discomfort without being able to articulate exactly what concerned him. Jennifer, always diplomatic, suggested that Vanessa was probably just trying to understand her future husband's work environment and ensure she could be supportive of his career. It was natural, Jennifer argued, for someone in Vanessa's position to want to understand the business that would likely shape their family's future. Marcus accepted Jennifer's reasoning, but privately he began paying closer attention to Vanessa's interactions with clients and employees. What he observed was a woman who possessed remarkable social intelligence, able to quickly identify what each person valued and respond accordingly. With older clients, she was respectful and deferential. With younger staff members, she was friendly and inclusive. With Jennifer, she was professional and strategic. With Marcus, she was charming but careful, never revealing too much of her own thoughts or opinions. The wedding took place on a beautiful Saturday in May at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. It was elegant without being ostentatious, personal without being intimate. Vanessa had managed to create an event that impressed their guests while staying within the budget that Marcus and Sarah had agreed to contribute. David looked happier than Marcus had ever seen him, and Vanessa was radiant, gracious, and everything a bride should be. As Marcus walked his new daughter-in-law around the dance floor during the traditional father-daughter dance, she smiled up at him and spoke words that would later seem prophetic. "Thank you for raising such a wonderful man," she said. "I promise you, Marcus, David and I are going to take everything you've built and make it even better. You'll be so proud of what we accomplished together." At the time, Marcus heard those words as a commitment to continue the family legacy, to build upon the foundation he had spent 3 decades creating. Later, he would remember the emphasis she had placed on certain words, the way she had said "David and I" rather than including Marcus in the future plans, and the confidence in her voice that suggested she had already determined how that future would unfold. The newlyweds honeymooned in Europe for 3 weeks, visiting London, Paris, and Rome. They returned with stories of amazing experiences, photographs of beautiful places, and what appeared to be a deeper bond and shared vision for their life together. David seemed more confident, more assertive, and more eager to take on additional responsibilities at Whitfield Financial Services. Marcus was pleased by his son's enthusiasm and began gradually transferring more significant client relationships and decision-making authority to David. The transition was smooth, with clients responding positively to David's fresh perspective and obvious competence. Several longtime clients remarked to Marcus that David reminded them of Marcus himself at a younger age, combining technical expertise with genuine care for their financial well-being. Vanessa, meanwhile, had left her position at the marketing firm and was considering several different career options. She spoke about possibly pursuing graduate school, starting her own consulting business, or finding a position with a larger company that would allow her to use her skills in strategic planning and business development. Marcus encouraged her to take her time making the decision, understanding that the early months of marriage were an important period of adjustment. What Marcus didn't realize was that Vanessa had already made her decision. She had spent the months since the wedding studying Whitfield Financial Services with the same intensity she had once applied to wedding planning. She understood the client base, the revenue streams, the competitive advantages, and most importantly, the succession plan that Marcus had carefully developed to ensure David's eventual control of the company. Vanessa had concluded that Marcus's gradual approach to transition was inefficient and potentially problematic. At 64, Marcus was still sharp, energetic, and deeply involved in day-to-day operations. But Vanessa could see that his conservative approach to growth and change was limiting the company's potential. She believed that with more aggressive marketing, updated technology, and strategic partnerships, Whitfield Financial Services could double or triple its revenue within 5 years. The problem, as Vanessa saw it, was that Marcus's continued involvement was preventing David from implementing the changes necessary to achieve that growth. Clients still look to Marcus for major decisions, employees still defer to his judgment, and the company's culture still reflected his cautious, relationship-focused approach rather than the more ambitious, profit-oriented strategy that Vanessa believed was necessary for success in the modern business environment. During quiet conversations with David, Vanessa began planting seeds of doubt about his father's leadership. She pointed out missed opportunities, questioned conservative decisions, and suggested that Marcus's age and old-fashioned approach were holding back the company's potential. She was careful to frame these observations as concerns about David's future rather than criticisms of Marcus, always emphasizing her desire to see David succeed and achieve his full potential. David, who loved and respected his father but also felt the natural desire of a young man to prove himself independently, began to see merit in some of Vanessa's observations. He started to notice times when Marcus seemed resistant to new ideas or reluctant to pursue potentially profitable opportunities. He began to wonder if his father's gradual approach to transition was really about ensuring David's readiness or whether it reflected Marcus's reluctance to give up control. By their first wedding anniversary, the dynamic within the Whitfield family had begun to shift in ways that Marcus sensed but didn't fully understand. David seemed more impatient with the pace of change at the company, more critical of conservative decisions, and more influenced by Vanessa's opinions about business strategy. Vanessa herself had become more involved in discussions about the company's future, offering suggestions and observations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the business environment. Marcus attributed these changes to the natural evolution of a young married couple finding their place in the world. He actually appreciated Vanessa's intelligence and business acumen, even when he disagreed with her conclusions. He saw her influence on David as potentially positive, pushing his son to think more strategically and ambitiously about the future of Whitfield Financial Services. What Marcus failed to recognize was that Vanessa's ultimate goal wasn't to improve the company or support David's growth as a business leader. Her goal was to accelerate the timeline for David's complete control of the business, eliminating Marcus's influence and implementing changes that would maximize short-term profits and position the company for sale to a larger firm. Vanessa had already begun researching potential buyers, studying acquisition patterns in the financial services industry, and calculating the potential value of Whitfield Financial Services under different ownership structures. Marcus had concluded that Marcus's gradual approach to transition was inefficient and potentially problematic. At 64, Marcus was still sharp, energetic, and deeply involved in day-to-day operations. But Vanessa could see that his conservative approach to growth and change was limiting the company's potential. She believed that with more aggressive marketing, updated technology, and strategic partnerships, Whitfield Financial Services could double or triple its revenue within 5 years. The problem, as Vanessa saw it, was that Marcus's continued involvement was preventing David from implementing the changes necessary to achieve that growth. Clients still look to Marcus for major decisions, employees still defer to his judgment, and the company's culture still reflected his cautious, relationship-focused approach rather than the more ambitious, profit-oriented strategy that Vanessa believed was necessary for success in the modern business environment. During quiet conversations with David, Vanessa began planting seeds of doubt about his father's leadership. She pointed out missed opportunities, questioned conservative decisions, and suggested that Marcus's age and old-fashioned approach were holding back the company's potential. She was careful to frame these observations as concerns about David's future rather than criticisms of Marcus, always emphasizing her desire to see David succeed and achieve his full potential. David, who loved and respected his father, but also felt the natural desire of a young man to prove himself independently, began to see merit in some of Vanessa's observations. He started to notice times when Marcus seemed resistant to new ideas or reluctant to pursue potentially profitable opportunities. He began to wonder if his father's gradual approach to transition was really about ensuring David's readiness or whether it reflected Marcus's reluctance to give up control. By their first wedding anniversary, the dynamic within the Whitfield family had begun to shift in ways that Marcus sensed but didn't fully understand. David seemed more impatient with the pace of change at the company, more critical of conservative decisions, and more influenced by Vanessa's opinions about business strategy. Vanessa herself had become more involved in discussions about the company's future, offering suggestions and observations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the business environment. Marcus attributed these changes to the natural evolution of a young married couple finding their place in the world. He actually appreciated Vanessa's intelligence and business acumen, even when he disagreed with her conclusions. He saw her influence on David as potential. She believed that with the right strategic changes, the company could be sold within 3 years for significantly more than its current valuation, providing her and David with the capital to pursue other opportunities or simply enjoy early retirement. The foundation that Marcus had spent 37 years building was solid, profitable, and positioned for continued growth. But it was also vulnerable in ways that Marcus had never anticipated. He had built the company on relationships, trust, and long-term thinking. Those same qualities that had made Whitfield Financial Services successful also made it susceptible to someone who understood how to manipulate relationships, exploit trust, and prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability. As the second year of David and Vanessa's marriage began, Marcus continued to work with the same dedication and integrity that had always defined his approach to business. He had no idea that his own son and daughter-in-law were already planning his removal from the company he had built, or that the foundation he had spent decades creating was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined possible. The first crack in Marcus's carefully built world appeared on a Tuesday morning in September when David walked into his office with a folder full of proposals and a determined expression that reminded Marcus of himself at that age. David had been married to Vanessa for 16 months, and Marcus had watched his son grow more confident and assertive with each passing week. What Marcus hadn't expected was the direction that confidence would take. "Dad, we need to talk about modernizing our client acquisition strategy," David said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "I've been working with Vanessa on some research, and we think there are significant opportunities we're missing." Marcus looked up from the financial statements he'd been reviewing, noting the way David had said "we" when referring to himself and Vanessa. It wasn't the first time David had presented ideas that clearly bore his wife's influence, but something about his tone suggested this conversation was more serious than previous discussions about business strategy. "I'm always interested in your ideas," Marcus replied, setting aside his papers and giving David his full attention. "What kind of opportunities are you thinking about?" David opened the folder and spread several documents across Marcus's desk. The presentation was professional, thorough, and clearly represented hours of research and analysis. Charts showed demographic trends, competitor analysis, and potential revenue projections. It was impressive work, though Marcus could see Vanessa's marketing background in the polished graphics and persuasive language. The core issue is that we're too dependent on referrals and traditional networking, David explained, pointing to a chart that showed their current client acquisition methods. Vanessa's research indicates that firms our size are capturing significantly more market share by investing in digital marketing, strategic partnerships with real estate agents and attorneys, and more aggressive outreach to high-net-worth individuals. Marcus studied the charts carefully, appreciating the thoroughness of the analysis while feeling some concern about the underlying assumptions. The data was accurate, but it seemed to prioritize rapid growth over the relationship-building approach that had sustained Whitfield Financial Services for 3 decades. "These are interesting projections," Marcus said diplomatically, "but I'd want to understand how this kind of aggressive expansion would affect our service quality and client relationships. Our current clients value the personal attention they receive. Rapid growth could compromise that." David's expression shifted slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of frustration that seemed disproportionate to the nature of their discussion. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding us back," David said, his voice carrying an edge that Marcus had never heard before. "Vanessa helped me realize that we're so focused on maintaining the status quo that we're missing opportunities to build something really significant." The mention of Vanessa's influence bothered Marcus more than he wanted to admit. While he respected his daughter-in-law's intelligence and business acumen, he was concerned about how quickly David seemed to be adopting her perspectives, especially when those perspectives challenged approaches that had proven successful over decades. "I'm not opposed to growth," Marcus replied carefully, "but sustainable growth requires maintaining the foundation that makes growth possible. Our reputation for integrity and personal service isn't just good ethics, it's good business. It's why clients trust us with their financial futures." David gathered the papers with movements that seemed more abrupt than necessary. "Maybe we can revisit this when you've had more time to consider the data," he said, standing to leave. "Vanessa thinks that generational differences in business philosophy might be creating some blind spots for both of us." After David left, Marcus sat quietly in his office, troubled by the interaction in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The proposals themselves weren't unreasonable, though they represented a more aggressive approach than Marcus believed was wise. What bothered him more was the apparent shift in David's perspective, the suggestion that Marcus's experience and judgment represented outdated thinking rather than hard-earned wisdom. That evening, Marcus mentioned the conversation to Sarah over dinner, describing David's proposals and his concerns about the direction of their discussions. Sarah, who had always been Marcus's most trusted advisor on family matters, listened carefully before offering her perspective. "David's at an age where he needs to prove himself," she said thoughtfully, "and Vanessa is probably encouraging him to be more assertive about his vision for the company. That's not necessarily a bad thing, even if it creates some tension." Marcus nodded, appreciating Sarah's balanced perspective. She was probably right that some of the friction was natural, even healthy, as David transitioned into a more senior role. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's influence was pushing David toward changes that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability. Over the following weeks, David continued to present proposals for various changes to the business model, operations, and strategic direction. Each presentation was professional and well-researched, clearly reflecting significant time and effort. But they also reflected a consistent pattern of challenging Marcus's judgment and questioning the approaches that had made Whitfield Financial Services successful. Jennifer Chen, who had worked closely with Marcus for over 20 years, began expressing her own concerns during their regular partner meetings. She had noticed changes in David's behavior and decision-making that seemed inconsistent with his previous approach to client relationships and business development. "He's becoming much more focused on revenue per client and profit margins," Jennifer observed during one of their private discussions. "Last week, he suggested that we should consider dropping some of our smaller clients because they don't generate enough fees to justify the attention we give them. That's not the David I've known for the past several years." Marcus found Jennifer's observations troubling because they confirmed his own concerns about the direction of David's thinking. The suggestion to abandon smaller clients was particularly problematic because those relationships had always been central to Whitfield Financial Services' reputation and referral network. Many of their most valuable clients had started as small accounts that grew over time as their businesses succeeded. "I think Vanessa's influence is stronger than we realized," Marcus admitted to Jennifer. "She's intelligent and business savvy, but her background is in marketing and sales rather than relationship-based professional services. She may not understand why some of our approaches work better in the long term, even if they seem inefficient in the short term." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "The challenge is that David seems to be interpreting any resistance to these ideas as resistance to his leadership or his future with the company. Vanessa may be framing these discussions in ways that make him feel like he has to choose between his loyalty to you and his commitment to their marriage." The insight was perceptive and troubling. Marcus had built his relationship with David on mutual respect and shared values, but those bonds might not be strong enough to withstand systematic efforts to create division and conflict. If Vanessa was indeed encouraging David to see Marcus's guidance as interference rather than support, it could create exactly the kind of destructive dynamic that Jennifer was describing. Marcus decided to address the situation directly by inviting David and Vanessa to dinner at the family home, hoping that a relaxed, informal conversation might help him understand their perspective and find common ground. Sarah prepared David's favorite meal, and Marcus made an effort to focus on family rather than business during the early part of the evening. Vanessa was charming as always, complimenting Sarah's cooking and sharing amusing stories about her new position with a marketing consultancy. She had recently landed several high-profile clients and seemed genuinely excited about her professional success. Marcus found himself wondering if part of the pressure for changes at Whitfield Financial Services came from Vanessa's own ambitious nature and desire to see similar rapid success in David's career. When the conversation eventually turned to business, Marcus tried to approach the topic diplomatically. "I've been thinking about your proposals for expanding our client base," he said to David. "There's definitely merit in some of the strategies you've outlined. I'd like to understand better how you envision implementing them without compromising the service quality that's been our competitive advantage." David's response was more animated than Marcus had expected, suggesting that he and Vanessa had discussed this conversation in advance. "The problem is that you're defining service quality in terms of time spent rather than results achieved," David said, his tone carrying the confidence of someone who had rehearsed his arguments. "Vanessa helped me realize that we can actually serve clients better by being more efficient and systematic in our approach." Vanessa joined the conversation smoothly, demonstrating detailed knowledge of the firm's operations and client relationships. "What David and I have been discussing is how to scale the personal touch that makes Whitfield Financial Services special," she said. "Technology and better systems can actually enhance relationships by giving you more time to focus on strategic advice rather than routine tasks." Marcus listened carefully, appreciating the logic of their arguments while remaining concerned about the underlying assumptions. The proposals weren't inherently flawed, but they reflected a fundamental shift in philosophy from relationship building to efficiency optimization. That shift might produce short-term gains while undermining the foundation that had sustained the business for 3 decades. "Those are valid points," Marcus acknowledged, "but I think we need to be careful about changing too many things too quickly. Our clients have come to expect a certain level of personal attention and accessibility. If we become too systematized, we might lose the qualities that differentiate us from larger firms." The discussion continued for another hour, with David and Vanessa presenting increasingly detailed arguments for their proposed changes. Marcus found himself impressed by their preparation and strategic thinking, even as he remained skeptical about the wisdom of implementing such significant changes so rapidly. What troubled Marcus most was the dynamic between David and Vanessa during the conversation. David consistently deferred to Vanessa's opinions and seemed to view her agreement as validation for his positions. Vanessa, meanwhile, demonstrated remarkable skill in framing their proposals as natural evolution rather than fundamental change, making Marcus's concerns seem unnecessarily conservative. After David and Vanessa left that evening, Sarah expressed her own observations about the conversation. "Vanessa is very persuasive," she said thoughtfully. "But I got the impression that she's already decided what changes should be made, and this conversation was more about convincing you to agree than about genuinely considering your perspective." Marcus had reached the same conclusion. While David and Vanessa had presented their ideas professionally and respectfully, the conversation had felt more like a sales presentation than a family discussion about the future of the business. The level of detail and preparation suggested that they had already committed to a particular course of action and were seeking Marcus's approval rather than his input. Over the following months, the tension between Marcus's cautious approach and David's ambitious plans became increasingly apparent in their daily interactions. David began making decisions that reflected the strategies he and Vanessa had outlined, sometimes without consulting Marcus or Jennifer. He hired a marketing consultant to develop a social media presence for the firm, purchased expensive customer relationship management software, and began pursuing partnerships with real estate agents and attorneys that required significant time investments with uncertain returns. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to provide guidance and oversight without appearing to undermine David's authority or confidence. The balancing act was exhausting and increasingly unsuccessful, as David seemed to interpret any questions or concerns as evidence that Marcus didn't trust his judgment or support his vision for the company. The situation reached a crisis point in February when David announced that he had scheduled meetings with 3 large financial services firms to discuss potential partnership opportunities. The meetings had been arranged without Marcus's knowledge or input, despite the fact that such partnerships would require board approval and could significantly impact the company's independence and culture. Marcus requested a private meeting with David to discuss the partnership meetings, hoping to understand the rationale and ensure that any agreements would preserve the values and relationships that had made Whitfield Financial Services successful. The conversation took place in David's office, which had been recently redecorated to reflect a more modern corporate aesthetic. "I'm concerned that these partnership discussions are moving too quickly," Marcus began, trying to keep his tone neutral and supportive. "Strategic partnerships can be valuable, but they need to be carefully structured to protect our clients' interests and our company's independence." David's response was immediate and more confrontational than Marcus had expected. "That's exactly the problem," David said, his voice carrying frustration that seemed to have been building for months. "Every time I try to move this company forward, you find reasons to slow things down or question the approach. Vanessa's helped me understand that this pattern is preventing us from achieving our potential." Marcus felt a chill at the mention of Vanessa's analysis of their relationship. The suggestion that his guidance and oversight represented obstruction rather than wisdom was deeply troubling, especially coming from his own son. It indicated that the division between them had grown more serious than Marcus had realized. "My concerns aren't about slowing progress," Marcus replied carefully. "They're about ensuring that changes support our long-term success rather than just short-term growth. These partnerships could fundamentally alter the nature of our business and our relationships with clients." David stood up from behind his desk, a gesture that seemed designed to emphasize his authority rather than facilitate discussion. "Vanessa and I have done extensive research on these firms," he said firmly. "We understand the implications better than you think. What we need is support for implementing positive changes, not constant second-guessing of our judgment." The conversation deteriorated from there, with David expressing frustration about Marcus's continued involvement in decisions that David believed should be his responsibility. Marcus tried to explain his perspective about the importance of experienced oversight during major transitions, but David seemed to interpret every comment as evidence that Marcus didn't trust his capabilities or respect his authority. When Marcus left David's office that afternoon, he realized that the relationship between them had shifted in ways that might be irreversible. David was no longer seeking guidance or collaboration, he was seeking approval for decisions that had already been made. The partnership that Marcus had envisioned for their transition had been replaced by a power struggle that neither of them had intended, but both of them seemed unable to avoid. That evening, Marcus called Jennifer to discuss his concerns about the direction of the company and the deterioration of his relationship with David. Jennifer had observed the same patterns and shared Marcus's worries about the potential consequences of David's increasingly aggressive approach to business development. "I think we need to consider the possibility that David and Vanessa have already decided to pursue a fundamentally different strategy for the company," Jennifer said during their conversation. "The partnership meetings, the marketing initiatives, the operational changes, they all point toward preparing the business for sale rather than long-term growth." The observation was insightful and disturbing. If David and Vanessa were indeed positioning the company for acquisition, it would explain their focus on rapid growth and efficiency optimization rather than relationship building and long-term sustainability. It would also explain why they seemed impatient with Marcus's continued involvement and resistant to his guidance. Marcus spent that night lying awake, thinking about the implications of Jennifer's analysis. If David was planning to sell the company, it would represent a complete betrayal of everything Marcus had worked to build. Whitfield Financial Services wasn't just a business to Marcus, it was a legacy, a commitment to clients who had trusted them for decades, and a foundation for future generations of the family. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would prove to be both necessary and devastating. He scheduled a meeting with his attorney to discuss options for protecting the company and ensuring that any major decisions would require his approval. He had built Whitfield Financial Services, and he wasn't going to stand by while it was dismantled for short-term profit. But Marcus's efforts to protect the business would soon be met by a level of manipulation and strategic thinking that he had never encountered before. Vanessa had spent months studying not just the business, but Marcus himself, learning his weaknesses, his attachments, and his vulnerabilities. She was about to demonstrate that she understood exactly how to use that knowledge to achieve her goals. The confrontation that would define the rest of Marcus's life began with a seemingly innocent suggestion from Vanessa during a family dinner in March. She mentioned that she and David had been looking at houses and had found a beautiful property in the West Hills that would be perfect for entertaining clients and establishing themselves as successful business leaders in the community. The house, as Vanessa described it, was impressive but expensive, requiring a financial commitment that would stretch even David's substantial salary from Whitfield Financial Services. Vanessa suggested that perhaps Marcus and Sarah might consider providing assistance with the down payment, framing it as an investment in David's future and the company's image. Marcus's initial response was cautious but supportive. He understood the importance of image in professional services and appreciated that David and Vanessa wanted to establish themselves appropriately. But he also believed that such a significant financial commitment should be carefully considered and structured properly. "Let's take a look at the numbers," Marcus suggested. "If this is the right move for your future, we can certainly discuss ways to make it work, but I'd want to understand the full financial picture and make sure the timing makes sense." Vanessa's smile was warm and grateful, but Marcus caught a glimpse of something calculating in her expression. "That would be wonderful," she said. "David and I have already done some preliminary analysis. We think this could actually be a great opportunity for the whole family." Over the following weeks, Marcus learned that Vanessa's definition of opportunity was quite different from his own. The house she and David wanted to purchase was indeed beautiful, but it was also significantly more expensive than Marcus had initially understood. The purchase price, combined with renovations and furnishing costs, would require an investment of nearly $500,000. More troubling than the cost was the financing structure that Vanessa had proposed. Rather than a traditional loan or gift, she suggested that Marcus could purchase the house as an investment property and lease it to David and Vanessa at below-market rent. The arrangement would provide tax benefits for Marcus while allowing David and Vanessa to live in a property they couldn't otherwise afford. Marcus's attorney and accountant both raised concerns about the proposed arrangement, pointing out potential legal and financial complications that could arise if the family relationships became strained. But Vanessa had prepared responses to every objection, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of tax law and investment strategy. The discussion about the house purchase revealed the extent to which Vanessa had been planning and strategizing about the family's financial relationships. She had clearly researched Marcus's assets, investment portfolio, and tax situation in detail. Her proposal wasn't just about securing housing for herself and David, it was about establishing financial leverage that could be used to influence future decisions. Marcus found himself in an impossible position. Refusing to help with the house purchase would create family conflict and potentially drive David further away. But agreeing to Vanessa's terms would establish a financial relationship that could be used to manipulate his decisions about the business and other family matters. After weeks of consideration and consultation with his advisors, Marcus agreed to a modified version of Vanessa's proposal. He would provide the down payment as a loan to David with reasonable interest and repayment terms. The arrangement would help David and Vanessa purchase the house while maintaining clear financial boundaries and expectations. David and Vanessa moved into their new home in May, hosting a housewarming party that demonstrated Vanessa's talent for event planning and social networking. The guest list included clients, colleagues, and community leaders, all of whom seemed impressed by the elegant property and sophisticated hospitality. Marcus had to admit that Vanessa had been right about the importance of image and the value of creating appropriate settings for business entertainment. But Marcus's satisfaction with the arrangement was short-lived. Within weeks of moving into the house, David and Vanessa began using it as justification for additional changes to their lifestyle and financial expectations. The mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance costs were higher than anticipated, creating financial pressure that David suggested could be relieved by increasing his salary and ownership stake in Whitfield Financial Services. The requests for increased compensation and equity were presented as natural consequences of David's growing responsibilities and the family's financial commitments. Vanessa had prepared detailed analysis showing how David's contributions to the business had increased and how his compensation lagged behind industry standards for executives at comparable firms. Marcus recognized the logic of the arguments while feeling manipulated by the way they were presented. The house purchase had created financial pressures that were now being used to justify changes to David's role and compensation at the company. It was a sophisticated strategy that used Marcus's own generosity as leverage for additional concessions. The situation became more complex when David announced that he and Vanessa were expecting their first child. The pregnancy was wonderful news that brought joy to the entire family, but it also created additional financial pressures and emotional leverage that Vanessa seemed prepared to use strategically. "We want to make sure we can provide the best possible opportunities for our child," David explained during a family dinner where he and Vanessa outlined their financial needs and expectations. "That means ensuring stability and growth in the business, proper compensation for the work I'm doing, and appropriate equity stakes that reflect my role in the company's future." Marcus felt torn between his desire to support his son's growing family and his concerns about the direction of their discussions. Every conversation about the business had become intertwined with personal and financial pressures that made objective decision-making increasingly difficult. Sarah, who had initially been supportive of Vanessa and excited about becoming a grandmother, began expressing her own concerns about the changing family dynamics. "I feel like every interaction has become a negotiation," she confided to Marcus one evening. "Vanessa always seems to have an agenda, and David's starting to adopt the same approach." The observation was accurate and troubling. Family relationships that had once been based on love, trust, and mutual support were becoming transactional, with every decision evaluated in terms of financial advantage and strategic positioning. Marcus realized that Vanessa had systematically transformed the family dynamics in ways that served her interests while undermining the relationships that had once been sources of strength and stability. The final phase of Vanessa's strategy began in September when she announced that she was taking maternity leave from her consulting position and would be spending more time at Whitfield Financial Services, helping David with various projects and business development initiatives. She framed her increased involvement as temporary assistance during a busy period, but Marcus immediately recognized the implications. Vanessa's presence at the office became a daily reality with her own desk, business cards, and apparent authority to speak on behalf of David and the company. She attended client meetings, participated in strategic planning discussions, and began implementing changes to office procedures and protocols without consulting Marcus or Jennifer. The transformation was gradual but systematic. Vanessa introduced new policies for client communication, changed procedures for project management, and began requiring approvals for expenditures that had previously been handled at the staff level. Each change was presented as modernization or efficiency improvement, but the cumulative effect was to centralize control and reduce Marcus's influence over day-to-day operations. Marcus found himself increasingly isolated within the company he had built. Staff members began coming to David and Vanessa for decisions that had traditionally been his responsibility. Client relationships that had been built over decades were gradually transferred to David's oversight. Strategic planning discussions increasingly took place without Marcus's input or presence. The most troubling development was the way Vanessa had begun speaking about Marcus in front of employees and clients. She was always respectful and professional, but her comments consistently portrayed Marcus as someone whose involvement was transitional rather than ongoing. She would make references to "when David takes over" or "as we modernize the business" in ways that suggested Marcus's retirement was imminent rather than something he had chosen. By October, Marcus realized that he was being systematically pushed out of the company he had spent 37 years building. The process was sophisticated and subtle, designed to appear like a natural transition rather than deliberate manipulation. But the effect was unmistakable. His authority was being undermined, his relationships were being transferred, and his future role was being redefined without his consent. The confrontation that Marcus had been dreading finally came on a cold November morning when he arrived at the office to find that his parking space had been reassigned and his name had been removed from the directory in the lobby. When he asked David about the changes, he was told that they were part of a restructuring initiative that Vanessa had recommended to improve efficiency and clarify reporting relationships. "We're not trying to push you out," David explained, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We're just trying to establish clearer roles and responsibilities as the business grows. Vanessa thinks that having too many decision-makers creates confusion for clients and employees." Marcus looked at his son, seeing a stranger where once there had been the boy he had taught to organize files and operate copy machines. David's words might have been his own, but the sentiment behind them was purely Vanessa's. The manipulation was complete, and Marcus realized that he was about to lose everything he had spent his life building. That evening, Marcus sat in his home office, looking through 3 decades of financial records, client files, and business documents. Sarah found him there after midnight, surrounded by papers and wearing the expression of a man who had finally understood the scope of his defeat. "They're going to push me out," he said quietly. "Vanessa's been planning this for months, maybe years. She's turned David against me and positioned herself to control the business. I built this company for our family, and now our family is using it against me." Sarah sat down beside him, taking his hand and studying his face in the lamplight. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question that would determine the rest of his life. What was he going to do? For 37 years, the answer had always been simple: work harder, serve clients better, build something lasting. But now the foundation he had built was being used against him, and he needed to find a different kind of strength. "I'm going to fight," he said finally. "Not the way they expect, not with anger or desperation, but I'm going to remind them that wisdom and experience still matter. They think they've outmaneuvered me, but they don't understand what they're really fighting." The war for Marcus Whitfield's legacy was about to begin, and neither David nor Vanessa had any idea what they had awakened in the man they had tried so hard to defeat. Marcus Whitfield had spent 64 years learning that patience was often more powerful than aggression, and the next 6 months would test that lesson in ways he had never imagined. While David and Vanessa celebrated what they believed was their inevitable victory, Marcus quietly began implementing a strategy that would demonstrate the difference between ambition and wisdom. The first step was understanding exactly what he was facing. Marcus had built his career on thorough analysis and careful planning, and he approached this personal crisis with the same methodical precision that had made Whitfield Financial Services successful. He spent his evenings reviewing corporate documents, partnership agreements, and financial records, mapping out the legal and practical realities of his situation. What Marcus discovered was both encouraging and sobering. While David and Vanessa had gained significant influence over day-to-day operations, Marcus still retained majority ownership of the company and ultimate authority over major decisions. The gradual erosion of his practical control had not yet translated into legal vulnerability, but that protection would only last as long as he remained alert and engaged. More importantly, Marcus realized that Vanessa's strategy contained a fundamental flaw. Her approach was based on the assumption that business relationships were purely transactional, that clients and employees would automatically transfer their loyalty to whoever appeared to be in charge. That assumption revealed a profound misunderstanding of the foundation upon which Whitfield Financial Services had been built. Marcus had spent 3 decades earning trust through consistency, integrity, and genuine care for his clients' well-being. Those relationships weren't just business arrangements that could be transferred like assets on a balance sheet. They were personal bonds built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and demonstrated competence over time. The insight gave Marcus hope, but it also clarified the magnitude of the challenge he faced. Vanessa's manipulation of David wasn't just about gaining control of the business. It was about convincing David to abandon the values and approaches that had made the business successful in the first place. If Marcus was going to save his company, he would need to do more than assert his legal authority. He would need to demonstrate that his approach to business was not just morally superior, but practically more effective. Marcus began his counteroffensive with a series of quiet conversations with longtime clients, not to complain about David and Vanessa, but to reassure them about the company's continued commitment to the personalized service they valued. These conversations revealed that several clients had indeed noticed changes in the company's approach and were concerned about the implications for their own financial planning. Robert Chen, the successful restaurant owner who had been one of Marcus's first major clients, was particularly direct in expressing his concerns. "I've been working with you for 15 years, Robert said during a lunch meeting at his flagship location. Lately, when I call the office, I get transferred around and asked to schedule appointments for conversations we used to have spontaneously. It feels like you're becoming one of those big firms that treats clients like account numbers." Marcus listened carefully to Robert's observations, recognizing them as symptoms of the systematic changes Vanessa had implemented in the name of efficiency and modernization. The personal touch that had differentiated Whitfield Financial Services from larger competitors was being sacrificed for operational streamlining that might look good on spreadsheets but alienated the very clients it was supposed to serve. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," Marcus replied. "Those changes don't reflect my vision for how we should serve our clients. Let me make sure we address these issues immediately." Similar conversations with other longtime clients revealed a consistent pattern of dissatisfaction with the new procedures and policies that Vanessa had implemented. Clients missed the accessibility they had previously enjoyed, the personal relationships they had built with staff members, and the sense that their individual needs were understood and prioritized. Armed with this feedback, Marcus scheduled a meeting with David to discuss the client concerns and propose adjustments to the new policies. He approached the conversation strategically, focusing on client satisfaction and business performance rather than personal conflicts or power struggles. "I've been hearing from several longtime clients about concerns with our new procedures," Marcus began, presenting David with a summary of the feedback he had received. "They're feeling like we've become less accessible and more bureaucratic. I think we need to find ways to maintain efficiency while preserving the personal relationships that our clients value." David's response was immediate and defensive, suggesting that he and Vanessa had anticipated this conversation and prepared their position in advance. "Those clients are just resistant to change," David said dismissively. "Vanessa's research shows that modern clients actually prefer systematic processes and clear procedures. The feedback you're getting is probably from clients who haven't adapted to contemporary business practices." Marcus felt a surge of frustration at David's willingness to dismiss concerns from clients who had been loyal to the firm for decades. The response revealed how completely Vanessa had convinced David to prioritize theoretical efficiency over practical results, abstract analysis over direct client feedback. "Robert Chen isn't resistant to change," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level despite his growing anger. "He's built 3 successful restaurants by adapting to market trends and customer preferences. When someone like Robert tells us that our service has declined, we should listen and respond, not dismiss his concerns as outdated thinking." The conversation deteriorated from there, with David becoming increasingly argumentative and dismissive of Marcus's perspective. It became clear that David had been coached to interpret any criticism of the new policies as personal attacks on his leadership and vision for the company. Marcus left that meeting understanding that direct confrontation would not be effective. David was too committed to Vanessa's approach and too invested in proving his independence to consider alternatives based on Marcus's recommendations. A different strategy would be required, one that demonstrated the practical consequences of their decisions rather than simply arguing against them. Marcus began implementing that strategy by quietly reverting to the old procedures and policies for clients who requested them. When longtime clients called with questions or concerns, Marcus made himself personally available, regardless of the new scheduling requirements Vanessa had established. When clients needed immediate assistance with time-sensitive financial decisions, Marcus provided it without requiring the formal consultation processes that had been instituted. The results were immediately apparent. Clients who had been frustrated with the new procedures responded with gratitude and relief when they discovered that the personal service they valued was still available. Word spread quickly through the client base that Marcus was personally ensuring their needs were met, regardless of the official policies. Meanwhile, Marcus observed the consequences of Vanessa's systematic approach with clients who continued to follow the new procedures. Response times were slower, solutions were more generic, and client satisfaction was measurably declining. The efficiency gains that Vanessa had promised were being offset by the time required to manage client complaints and address problems that resulted from impersonal service. Jennifer Chen, who had been watching the situation develop with growing concern, became Marcus's most valuable ally in documenting the practical consequences of the competing approaches. As the firm's other senior partner, Jennifer had access to client feedback, financial performance data, and staff observations that provided objective evidence of the new policy's effectiveness. "The numbers don't lie," Jennifer reported during one of their private meetings. "Client retention is down 8% since the new procedures were implemented. Average transaction values are declining because clients aren't comfortable discussing larger financial decisions in the formal consultation format. And staff morale is suffering because they feel like they can't provide the level of service they know clients need." Jennifer's analysis confirmed what Marcus had suspected. Vanessa's approach might look sophisticated on paper, but it was undermining the practical performance that mattered to clients and employees. The evidence provided Marcus with ammunition for future discussions, but he also realized that David and Vanessa would likely dismiss negative data just as they had dismissed client complaints. The turning point came in February when one of the firm's largest clients, Patricia Morrison, announced that she was moving her investment portfolio to another firm. Patricia managed a family foundation with assets exceeding $12 million, and her departure would represent a significant financial blow to Whitfield Financial Services. Marcus requested a meeting with Patricia to understand her decision and see if the concerns could be addressed. Her explanation was devastatingly clear and directly related to the changes Vanessa had implemented. "I've been working with your firm for 8 years," Patricia said during their conversation. I chose Whitfield Financial Services because I could call you directly when I had questions, because you understood my family's values and priorities, and because I felt like a person rather than an account number. Over the past year, that relationship has disappeared. Now I have to schedule appointments to ask simple questions. I'm assigned to different staff members for different issues, and I feel like I'm being processed rather than served. Marcus apologized for the changes and offered to personally handle Patricia's account going forward, but she had already made her decision. "I'm sure you would provide excellent service," she said, "but I can't work with a firm that doesn't consistently deliver what I need. I have to be confident that every interaction will meet my standards, not just the ones where you're personally involved." Patricia's departure sent shockwaves through the firm, but David and Vanessa's response revealed the depth of their misunderstanding about client relationships. Rather than acknowledging that their policies had contributed to the loss, they attributed Patricia's decision to her personal preferences and suggested that the firm was better off without clients who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. Patricia Morrison is from an older generation that expects excessive personal attention, Vanessa explained during a staff meeting called to address the client departure. "The reality is that we can serve more clients more effectively by maintaining professional boundaries and systematic processes. One client's dissatisfaction doesn't negate the overall improvements we've achieved." Marcus watched his colleagues' faces during Vanessa's presentation, noting the discomfort and disagreement that several staff members were struggling to conceal. The dismissive attitude toward a valued client was troubling to employees who had built careers on providing personalized service and developing lasting relationships. After the meeting, several staff members approached Marcus privately to express their concerns about the direction of the firm. Miguel Santos, the office manager who had worked for Whitfield Financial Services for 12 years, was particularly direct in his assessment. "People are starting to look for other jobs," Miguel confided. "The new policies make it impossible to provide the kind of service we know clients need. When we try to go the extra mile, we get criticized for not following procedures. When we follow procedures, clients get frustrated and blame us for poor service. It's a no-win situation." The conversation with Miguel confirmed Marcus's growing understanding that Vanessa's strategy was creating problems that extended far beyond client relationships. The systematic approach she had implemented was demoralizing employees, reducing flexibility, and creating internal conflicts that undermined the collaborative culture Marcus had spent decades building. Marcus realized that his passive resistance strategy, while effective in demonstrating the problems with Vanessa's approach, was not sufficient to prevent long-term damage to the firm. More decisive action would be required, but that action would need to be strategic and carefully timed to maximize its effectiveness. The opportunity for decisive action came in March, when David announced that he had scheduled meetings with potential buyers for Whitfield Financial Services. The meetings were presented as exploratory discussions about strategic partnerships, but Marcus immediately recognized them as preliminary steps towards selling the company. Marcus's worst fears were confirmed when he reviewed the materials David had prepared for the meetings. The presentations emphasized the firm's growth potential under new management, highlighted operational improvements, and projected significant increases in profitability through consolidation and efficiency measures. The entire narrative was designed to position Whitfield Financial Services as an acquisition target that could be rapidly integrated into a larger organization. The discovery that David and Vanessa were actively pursuing a sale of the company represented the ultimate betrayal of everything Marcus had worked to build. Whitfield Financial Services wasn't just a business to Marcus, it was a legacy, a commitment to clients who had trusted him for decades, and a foundation for future generations of his family. Marcus understood that he had reached the point where compromise and negotiation were no longer possible. David and Vanessa had demonstrated that they were willing to sacrifice the firm's relationships, values, and long-term sustainability for short-term financial gain. If Marcus was going to save his life's work, he would need to take action that was as decisive as it was devastating. The strategy Marcus developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. Rather than fighting David and Vanessa directly, he would demonstrate the practical consequences of their approach by withdrawing his own involvement and allowing their policies to produce their natural results. Marcus began by informing his most important clients that he was considering retirement and wanted to ensure their needs would continue to be met appropriately. He didn't criticize David or Vanessa explicitly, but he made it clear that the firm's approach to client service was changing in ways that might not align with their expectations and preferences. The response from clients was immediate and overwhelming. Rather than accepting the changes, most of Marcus's longtime clients requested that he continue serving them personally, regardless of his official role with the firm. Several clients indicated that they would follow Marcus to a new firm if he decided to continue practicing independently. Simultaneously, Marcus reached out to Jennifer Chen and other key employees to gauge their interest in exploring alternative opportunities. He didn't make specific offers or commitments, but he made it clear that he was considering options that would allow him to continue providing the kind of personalized service that had always defined his approach to financial planning. The conversations with employees revealed widespread dissatisfaction with the changes Vanessa had implemented and genuine interest in working for an organization that prioritized client relationships over operational efficiency. Several staff members indicated that they had been hoping Marcus would take action to address the problems they had been observing. By April, Marcus had laid the groundwork for his counteroffensive, but he had not yet revealed his intentions to David or Vanessa. He wanted to ensure that his alternative plans were fully developed before initiating the confrontation that would determine the future of Whitfield Financial Services. The catalyst for that confrontation came when Marcus discovered that David had signed a letter of intent with Pacific Northwest Financial Group, a regional firm that specialized in acquiring smaller practices and integrating them into their standardized service model. The letter of intent committed Whitfield Financial Services to an exclusive negotiating period that would prevent Marcus from exploring other options or making changes to the firm's operations. Marcus realized that David had effectively signed away the company's independence without consulting him or the board of directors. The action was legally questionable and practically disastrous, but it also provided Marcus with the justification he needed for the decisive response he had been planning. Marcus scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following Monday, using his authority as majority owner to call the meeting without David's approval. The agenda was simple: review David's unauthorized commitments and determine the appropriate response to protect the firm's interests and independence. The board meeting took place in the conference room where Marcus had held hundreds of strategic planning sessions over the years. David and Vanessa arrived expecting a routine discussion about the Pacific Northwest Financial Group opportunity, but they quickly realized that Marcus had prepared for a very different kind of conversation. "I've called this meeting to address actions that threaten the independence and integrity of Whitfield Financial Services," Marcus began, his voice carrying an authority that had been absent from recent discussions. "David has made commitments to potential buyers without board approval, without consulting our clients, and without considering the impact on our employees and community relationships." David's response was immediate and defensive, but Marcus could see uncertainty in his son's expression that suggested he understood the seriousness of the situation. "Those discussions are preliminary," David said. "We're just exploring options for growth and expansion that could benefit everyone involved." Marcus placed a copy of the signed letter of intent on the conference table, its legal language clearly committing the firm to exclusive negotiations regardless of David's characterization of the discussions as preliminary. "This document commits us to a process that could result in the sale of the company," Marcus said calmly. "That decision requires board approval and consultation with all stakeholders. By signing this without authorization, you've exceeded your authority and potentially violated your fiduciary responsibilities." The meeting continued for 2 hours, with David and Vanessa presenting increasingly desperate arguments for their approach, while Marcus systematically dismantled their justifications. Jennifer Chen provided supporting documentation about client dissatisfaction, employee turnover, and declining performance metrics that contradicted the growth narrative David had been promoting. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that David had underestimated both Marcus's resolve and his preparation. The board voted unanimously to terminate the exclusive negotiating period with Pacific Northwest Financial Group and to implement immediate changes to the firm's management structure that would restore Marcus's operational authority. But Marcus's victory in the boardroom was only the beginning of his comprehensive response to David and Vanessa's betrayal. Over the following weeks, he implemented changes that demonstrated the difference between theoretical business knowledge and practical experience in client service and relationship management. Marcus reverted to the personalized service model that had built the firm's reputation, eliminating the bureaucratic procedures Vanessa had implemented and restoring the accessibility that clients valued. The response was immediate and dramatic, with client satisfaction scores improving rapidly and several clients who had been considering leaving deciding to stay. More significantly, Marcus announced the formation of Whitfield Legacy Financial, a new firm that would operate independently while maintaining relationships with selected clients who preferred a more personalized approach to financial planning. The new firm would be led by Marcus and staffed by employees who shared his commitment to relationship-based service. The announcement sent shockwaves through the local financial services community and created immediate pressure on David and Vanessa to respond. Several of their most important clients requested meetings to understand the implications of the changes, and key employees began exploring opportunities with the new firm. Jennifer Chen was the first to officially join Whitfield Legacy Financial, bringing her 20 years of experience and her relationships with dozens of clients who trusted her expertise and judgment. Miguel Santos followed shortly afterward, along with 3 other senior staff members who had grown frustrated with the constraints of Vanessa's systematic approach. The exodus of experienced employees created immediate operational problems for the original firm, but the loss of client relationships was even more devastating. Within 2 months of Marcus's announcement, nearly 40% of Whitfield Financial Services' client base had moved to the new firm, taking with them millions of dollars in assets under management. David and Vanessa found themselves in control of a firm that was rapidly losing its most valuable assets: experienced employees, loyal clients, and community reputation. The systematic efficiencies that Vanessa had implemented were irrelevant when there weren't enough clients to serve or enough experienced staff to serve them. The final blow came when Pacific Northwest Financial Group withdrew their acquisition offer, citing concerns about the firm's stability and the loss of key personnel and client relationships. The buyer had been interested in acquiring an established firm with strong client relationships and experienced staff, not a struggling organization with declining assets and uncertain prospects. Marcus watched the collapse of the original firm with mixed emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing his life's work diminished, but there was grim validation in the demonstration that business success required more than aggressive strategies and theoretical knowledge. It required relationships, trust, and the wisdom that came from years of experience serving clients through various market conditions and personal circumstances. David attempted to salvage the situation by reaching out to Marcus with requests for assistance and cooperation, but the conversations revealed how completely he had been influenced by Vanessa's approach to business and relationships. Even in crisis, David seemed unable to acknowledge that his decisions had contributed to the firm's problems or that Marcus's experience might be valuable in addressing them. The most telling conversation took place in June when David visited Marcus at the offices of Whitfield Legacy Financial, which had grown rapidly and was already approaching the size and profitability of the original firm at its peak. David looked around the busy office, observing the energy and enthusiasm of employees who were clearly thriving in the environment Marcus had created. "I don't understand how you did this so quickly," David admitted, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and defeat. "Vanessa said that starting over would be impossible at your age, that clients and employees would prefer working with a more established organization." Marcus looked at his son, seeing the uncertainty and doubt that had replaced the confidence David had displayed just months earlier. "Success isn't about age or establishment," Marcus replied gently. "It's about understanding what people need and consistently delivering it. Your clients didn't follow me because of my age or experience. They followed me because they trust that I'll take care of them." The insight seemed to penetrate David's defensive thinking, and for a moment, Marcus saw glimpses of the young man who had once worked beside him, organizing files and learning the importance of treating every client with respect and attention. But the moment passed, and David's expression hardened again with the stubborn pride that had made him susceptible to Vanessa's manipulation.
Vanessa says that this is just a temporary setback, David said, though his voice lacked conviction. She believes that the market will eventually recognize the value of systematic efficiency over personal relationships. Marcus felt sadness rather than anger at David's continued dependence on Vanessa's judgment, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that her approach had failed. The loyalty that should have been directed toward family and proven principles had been transferred to theories and strategies that prioritized ambition over wisdom. By autumn, the contrast between the two firms was undeniable. Whitfield Legacy Financial was thriving, with a growing client base, satisfied employees, and strong community relationships. The original Whitfield Financial Services was struggling to survive, having lost most of its valuable assets and facing mounting financial pressures. Vanessa, who had once been so confident in her ability to modernize and improve the business, became increasingly desperate in her efforts to reverse the firm's decline. She proposed increasingly aggressive marketing strategies, considered partnerships with questionable organizations, and even suggested legal action against Marcus for unfair competition and theft of trade secrets. But Marcus's success with Whitfield Legacy Financial wasn't based on secrets or unfair advantages. It was based on the same principles that had built the original firm: integrity, competence, and genuine care for clients' well-being. Those principles couldn't be stolen or replicated through aggressive strategies because they required the kind of commitment and consistency that developed over decades of practice. The end came in November, when David and Vanessa were forced to close Whitfield Financial Services and sell its remaining assets to cover outstanding debts and obligations. The firm that Marcus had spent 37 years building had been destroyed in less than 2 years by the very people who were supposed to preserve and enhance its legacy. Marcus felt no triumph in the failure of his son's business, but he did feel validation of the principles and approaches that had guided his entire career. The collapse of Whitfield Financial Services wasn't just a business failure. It was a demonstration that success required more than ambition, intelligence, and strategic thinking. It required wisdom, integrity, and the humility to learn from experience rather than dismiss it as outdated thinking. David and Vanessa's marriage didn't survive the business failure, with their relationship deteriorating under the pressure of financial stress and mutual recriminations about the decisions that had led to their downfall. Vanessa left Portland shortly after the firm's closure, reportedly moving to Seattle to pursue opportunities in corporate consulting. David remained in the area but struggled to find employment in the financial services industry, where his role in the destruction of a respected firm had become widely known. The house they had purchased with Marcus's assistance was lost to foreclosure, and David was forced to move back in with his parents while attempting to rebuild his career and his life. Marcus watched his son's struggles with complex emotions, feeling genuine sadness about David's suffering, while also recognizing that the consequences were the natural result of choices that David had made despite abundant warnings and guidance. The betrayal had been painful, but the failure had been educational in ways that might ultimately prove valuable if David was willing to learn from it. The relationship between Marcus and David remained strained, but gradually began to heal as David slowly acknowledged the extent of his mistakes and the value of the wisdom he had rejected. The process was slow and often difficult, requiring David to confront not just his business failures, but the ways in which he had allowed his judgment to be compromised by someone who didn't share his family's values or understand the principles that had made their success possible. 3 years after the collapse of the original firm, David approached Marcus with a request that demonstrated genuine humility and understanding. He asked not for financial assistance or business opportunities, but for the chance to learn from Marcus about the principles and approaches that had made Whitfield Legacy Financial successful. "I want to understand what I missed," David said during their conversation. "Not the technical aspects of the business, but the foundation that makes everything else work. I realize now that Vanessa was wrong about almost everything, but I need to understand why I couldn't see that at the time." Marcus agreed to work with David, not as father and son or employer and employee, but as teacher and student. The arrangement provided David with an opportunity to rebuild his understanding of business and relationships, while giving Marcus a chance to pass on the wisdom he had accumulated over 4 decades of practice. The teaching relationship proved beneficial for both men, allowing them to rebuild their personal bond while David developed genuine appreciation for the principles that had guided Marcus's career. David learned that business success wasn't just about strategies and systems, but about character, consistency, and commitment to serving others. Marcus, meanwhile, found satisfaction in seeing David develop the wisdom and humility that had been missing during his years with Vanessa. The young man who had once dismissed his father's guidance as outdated thinking now demonstrated genuine eagerness to learn and apply the lessons that experience had taught. 5 years after the crisis that had nearly destroyed their family and business, Marcus announced his retirement from Whitfield Legacy Financial, confident that the firm's culture and principles would continue under Jennifer Chen's leadership. The business had grown beyond its original size and profitability, serving hundreds of clients throughout the Pacific Northwest and employing dozens of people who shared Marcus's commitment to relationship-based financial planning. David, who had spent 3 years learning and rebuilding his understanding of the business, joined Whitfield Legacy Financial as a junior associate, starting at the bottom and working his way up based on merit rather than family connections. His progress was steady but measured, reflecting genuine competence and commitment rather than ambition or entitlement. The house that Marcus and Sarah had shared for 30 years became a gathering place for family celebrations and business events, with grandchildren playing in the same rooms where Marcus had once planned strategies for building his firm. The legacy that Marcus had worked to create had survived betrayal, manipulation, and near destruction, emerging stronger and more resilient than before. On quiet evenings, Marcus would sit in his home office, looking through the financial records and client files that documented 4 decades of serving others and building something lasting. The betrayal by David and Vanessa had been painful, but it had also demonstrated the strength of the foundation he had built and the value of the principles he had never abandoned. The most important lesson, Marcus realized, wasn't about business strategy or family dynamics, but about the nature of integrity itself. True integrity couldn't be stolen, manipulated, or destroyed by external forces because it was based on internal choices and commitments that no one else could control. Vanessa had been able to manipulate David's thinking and temporarily damage the firm's operations, but she had never been able to touch the foundation of relationships and trust that made Marcus's success possible. As Marcus prepared for his retirement years, he felt profound satisfaction not just about what he had built, but about what he had preserved. The principles that had guided his career would continue to guide Whitfield Legacy Financial, serving future generations of clients and employees who value integrity over ambition and wisdom over cleverness. The story of Marcus Whitfield's career had been a testament to the power of patience, consistency, and commitment to serving others. The betrayal had tested those principles in ways he had never anticipated, but it had also demonstrated their ultimate strength and durability. In the end, the foundation had proven stronger than the forces that had tried to destroy it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.